The streets of Tel Aviv were brought to a near freeze on Wednesday afternoon as a scheduled protest against alleged police brutality and racism blocked major intersections and access routes. Scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. at the Azrieli Mall complex, thousands of primarily Ethiopian Israelis and their allies arrived early for an hours-long march that ended at Rabin Square by the Tel Aviv Municipality building. And eventually, tens of thousands of marchers poured into what became a mostly peaceful and very powerful rally.
Today we're protesting against the police brutality. We feel and see on the field that somehow, we don't know the reason, we call it racism, but our community are hurt.
Additionally, the protest leaders did have a permit, though not to block major junctions, which is what caused the extreme traffic. As for clashes with police, following protests in the past that had been marked with violence, protest organizers called for calm and civil behavior on the day of the march. And Tel Aviv police were likewise instructed beforehand to practice extreme caution when interacting with protesters.
Police units in Tel Aviv are on standby to respond to any types of incidents that could take place, disturbances or on any other scale. And that is after there is a demonstration taking place by the Ethiopian community. Prior to the demonstration, police units met with the leaders of the communities in order to make sure that the situation will be calm and quiet. Our units will respond to any incidents if they'll take place.
Unfortunately, though, at the end of the mostly peaceful event, around a dozen youths began clashing with police, throwing rocks, bottles, and burning garbage cans. 6 officers were injured and 11 protesters were arrested. Now, this rally was put together after 24-year-old Ethiopian-Israeli Yehuda Biadga was killed on January 18th in Bat Yam.
We are here today protest against violence about our community. Last week been killed by police, one of the Ethiopian Israeli adult killed by police. And today we are here to protest and to say no more violence against us. We are here. We had so many years of dreaming to be a part of the Israeli society, and today we are saying no more violence against us.
Biadga reportedly suffered from extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, which caused him to behave erratically. On the day of his death, police were called when Biadga was reportedly brandishing a knife in his building's stairwell before running with the knife into the street. And according to police, when the officer in question arrived, Biadga then charged towards him and refused calls to stop. So the officer, fearing for his life, responded with deadly force. Still, protesters say the officer could have aimed to incapacitate, as the military is trained to do, and the officer has been placed on leave while an investigation has been opened. Further, this is far from the only alleged incident of police abuse or discrimination. That's why for many, this protest is a long time coming. And finally, in response to Biadga's death and in order to regain public trust, Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan has now also launched a project to equip all police in Tel Aviv with body cameras as soon as possible. Top officials in the United States intelligence community are now warning Israel that the risks behind continued airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria may not be worth the reward. Speaking to a congressional hearing on Tuesday as part of an annual worldwide threat assessment, United States Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats explained that Iran seeks to avoid a major armed conflict with Israel, but Israeli strikes that result in Iranian casualties increase the likelihood of Iranian conventional retaliation against Israel. In fact, Coats added that the hundreds of reported IDF strikes in Syria over the past few years haven't had much of any deterrent effect on Iranian investment in the region anyway, saying that, quote, Iran continues to pursue permanent military bases and economic deals in Syria and probably wants to maintain a network of Shia foreign fighters there despite Israeli attacks, end quote. These sentiments were also echoed the day before by Israeli President Reuven Rivlin while speaking to a conference in Tel Aviv. But doing nothing to stop Iran from encroaching on the border is not an option that the government is willing to consider. Netanyahu and his security staff have all maintained that Israel will do whatever necessary to prevent Iran from reaching its widely publicized goal of wiping Israel off the map. To that end, Israel has also then been holding meetings with Russian envoys for Syrian affairs. Russia-Israel ties have been strained since September when Syrian air defenses shot down a Russian aircraft following Israeli strikes. But Moscow has continued to support Israel's right to self-defense, and Israeli military leaders have also indicated that only Russia is capable of completely removing Iran from Syria. In the day after his campaign launching speech, former IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz and his new Israel Resilience Party have jumped tremendously in the polls. In fact, according to Chadashot TV News and Channel 13, if Israel Resilience continues as a lone party, Wednesday's poll results awards them a minimum of 21 seats in the Knesset to the Likud's 30. And if Gantz were to lead a unity party with Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid faction, the poll projects that they would actually win, with 35 seats to the Likud's 30. That being said, the reverse was not as true. According to the results, if Lapid were to head that same unity bloc with Gantz, their joint faction would come up short with 30 parliament mandates to the Likud's 31. All the other remaining parties polled at 7 mandates or below. Many didn't even cross the minimum threshold. Therefore, the news reports concluded by predicting that more alliances and cooperative deals will likely occur between now and April elections. And the Chadashot News surveyed over 500 respondents and had a margin of error of 4.4%. Channel 13 polled over 750 respondents. Channel 13 polled over 750 respondents and had a 3.7% margin of error. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been taking out multiple campaign ads against his competition, including against Gantz, who he calls a weak leftist in a video posted to social media earlier this week. Though in 2011, at a time that Gantz was still active in the military, Prime Minister Netanyahu called him an excellent officer who played a central role in Israel's leadership and was owed a great deal of thanks. Also, Netanyahu and the Likud aren't the only ones who've been a bit blown back by these latest polls. For example, Finance Minister Moshe Kachron dismissed his party's poor polling results, while Yesh Atid party sources continue to support their head, Yair Lapid, as the only politician capable of running against Netanyahu. Finally, Labour Party activists reportedly reacted to Gantz's opening speech with despair, following the Labour Party's failure to recover from splitting up the Zionist Union with Tzipi Livni's Hatnuah party. After its incredibly successful reception in 2018, the 2019 annual Cybertech conference in Tel Aviv has returned, and over 15,000 listeners, 170 speakers, 200 companies, and many more were in attendance. Well, ILTV's Lidar Gavelazi was also fortunate enough to get into the conference this year for a first-hand look at one of the world's top events in cybertech and securities. This ahead of the premiere of her amazing new show, ILTV's Innovation Israel. Let's take a look.
So what Cyberbee does, we've created the cyber training and innovation centers that we are building around the world, allowing people to go and learn how to be a cybersecurity professional and have actually a profession. And also help organizations who already have cybersecurity people that need to go through training on a yearly basis.
So I'm here with Gilad Peri from Triple Cyberness. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, so in Triple Cyber, we actually developed a very interactive awareness training, employee awareness training on using virtual reality.
Can I try it?
Of course, we'll be happy to have you try it.
Let's go, let's try. So I'm going to try virtual reality cyber training. Let's see. We see a really long line for your booth, so why don't you tell us a little bit about Cybereason?
So Cybereason is an Israeli cybersecurity company. We help large organizations, big enterprise, and governmental organizations to protect themselves against the emerging threats of cyber.
And so how do you do that?
So we're deployed inside the organization. So we collect a lot of information that is coming from the normal activity of the employees of the company, of the servers that are part of the infrastructure of the company. And we're able to analyze this huge amount of data to determine when something goes wrong, when a malicious actor is starting doing things and trying to get to their targets, basically. And we detect that, and we also provide the information that allows our customers to respond and remediate the attack. So hopefully we can do all of that in a very fast time before any damage is done.
We, as the National Cyber Directorate, we take a good look of these technologies and how to broaden the definition of cybersecurity in order to mitigate with all these new attack surfaces.
This revolution that you're seeing from 2007 to 2017 is a revolution that is changing our world both economically and in terms of security. I think it'll also change our politics. And what it is basically the meeting ground between big data, IT, and connectivity. Everything is being driven from this nexus. Everything. For example, new industries are being formed. What's the first new industry that's being formed? It's right here in this room. It's the cybersecurity industry. Israel is 0.1% of the world's population, and we are receiving 20% of the global share in private cybersecurity investments. That's 200 times our weight in the world. What this revolution is doing, big data, AI, and connectivity, is allowing small countries to be big countries.
Well, I hope you enjoyed a sneak peek into the Cybertech Conference Tel Aviv. Until next time.
Now, as security forces deal with Gazan citizens riding across the Gaza-Israel border, Israeli Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan on Thursday prevented encroachment by the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem by extending the closure of various Palestinian institutions. The decision comes via the recommendation of security experts and officials, and the order will limit the number of actions available to organizations like the PLO headquarters in East Jerusalem, the Palestinian Prisoners Club, and the East Jerusalem Chamber of Commerce. Erdan also explained the decision, saying that, quote, any attempt by the Palestinian Authority to gain a foothold in the territory of the State of Israel will be stopped immediately, end quote. That Israel will continue to act so that other countries in the world will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and express this in practice by transferring their embassies to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, United States financial aid contributions towards Palestinian Authority security services are scheduled to end on Friday by the request of the Palestinian Authority. This to avoid massive losses in potential lawsuits. The threat of looming lawsuits came a number of weeks ago when ATCA, or the American Anti-Terrorism Cooperation Act, was passed. Under the new legislation, American courts would have expanded jurisdiction over any case and involving any foreign party accused of aiding or supporting terror, provided that that foreign party also accepts United States financial aid. This would mean that dozens of cases involving American victims and tens of millions of dollars in damages could be brought against the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and tried successfully in American courts. Therefore, PA negotiator Saeb Erekat explained to the AFP in Ramallah that the PA doesn't want any money if it will put them in court. He also rejected claims that the PA may be looking for a workaround where they can get the money through other American channels. Now, amidst the many commemoration ceremonies around the world for International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Sunday, one in particular is now standing out, and not for good reason. While Holocaust survivors and Polish government officials came together at the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland to mark the 74th anniversary of the liberation of the camp, dozens of Polish nationalist demonstrators from the Polish independence movement gathered at the opposite end of the camp in protest. This was the first time that a far-right protest rally has been held at Auschwitz on the same day as Holocaust Victims' Remembrance Day. And the demonstrators, led by fringe activist Piotr Rybak, were there accusing the Polish government of focusing only on the Jewish victims of the Holocaust and ignoring the Poles, Soviets, Roma, and others who were murdered by the Nazis. The protesters' assertions are far from correct, however, as the official government ceremony made many references to all the victims of the Nazi regime, regardless of their different backgrounds. Additionally, representatives from Russia and many other nations were also present for the official commemoration. It was asserted correctly, though, that most of the victims in the Holocaust, and indeed those most targeted, were in fact Jewish. And herein lies the protesters' true issue, as exposed by Rybak's own words. He told reporters at the rally that he and his mob were there to combat the narrative that millions of Jews were murdered by the Nazis, which is a fact, as well as against the idea that Poland collaborated with the Nazis, which is also verifiable through mountains of evidence and Nazi records left over from the war. In fact, over 3 million of Poland's 3.2 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis, accounting for nearly 50% of the total Jewish victims. Rybak also then reportedly stated that, quote, it's time to fight against Jewry and free Poland from them, end quote.
Nacja żydowska I Izrael robi wszystko, żeby zmienić historię państwa polskiego. Nacja żydowska robi wszystko, żeby zmienić historię tego obozu. Nie ma zgody patriotów polskich, nie ma zgody nacjonalistów polskich, żeby ktokolwiek zmieniał historię Polski I tego obozu.
Further, in addition to these aforementioned statements, Rybak has a long history of making anti-Semitic remarks and actions. For example, in 2017, he was sentenced to prison for 3 months for burning an effigy of an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man during a protest against admitting Muslim Syrian refugees into Europe. All right, just one day after initially denying entry to Qatari payments for thousands of poor citizens and government workers in the Gaza Strip, Islamic terror group Hamas on Saturday finally allowed the third installment of aid to be paid out with an additional $5 million. At first, the third Qatari payment of $15 million was halted by Israel as a punitive measure against Hamas's violence and incitement along the Gaza-Israel border. Essentially, it was Israel's way of saying no more to paying money for peace that never came. But then after the payment was later allowed by Israel in order to avoid a humanitarian crisis. Hamas, though, rejected the funds on the grounds that the agreements with Israel had been broken.
قدمنا رفضنا لاستقبال المنحة القطرية الثالثة ردا على نحن قدمنا رفضنا لاستقبال المنحة القطرية الثالثة ردا على سياسة الاحتلال بمحاولات التلكؤ ومحاولات عدم الالتزام بالتفاهمات ونحمله المسؤولية الكاملة أمام هذا التلكؤ والابتزاز ونحن نقول لن يكون شعبنا ولن تكون غزة ولن نقبل أن تكون التفاهمات جزء من عملية الابتزاز وجزء من العملية الانتخابية الصهيونية الداخلية.
However, following the initial block and amidst Hamas's reportedly dropping approval ratings, the Gaza terror organization did later facilitate the handing out of over $9.4 million in Qatari aid to thousands of needy families in the Strip. The payment was originally mostly for Hamas's salaries, but thousands of Gazans lined up at various post offices around the coastal enclave to receive $100 each. And Qatari officials were present at each and every one of these locations, overseeing that those receiving the funds were actually named on a list pre-approved by Israel. Palestinian sources allege that at least 6,000 families were removed from that list. Additionally, Qatari representatives reported to the AFP that they will no longer be funding Hamas's salaries anyway. Rather, Qatar will work with the international community in order to continue ensuring their funds end up in the neediest of hands. In other news, the Fatah Central Council has reportedly recommended that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas form a new government without Hamas. The current government based in Ramallah was established in 2014 through understandings reached between feuding factions Hamas and Fatah. However, as repeated attempts at reconciliation between the two have failed, Fatah officials see no reason to continue with the current government. Fatah, based in the West Bank, has been at odds with Hamas since 2007, when it was ousted from the Gaza Strip by the terror group. And the new government would also seek to replace current Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah. Palestinian news agency Wafa quoted Mahmoud al-Allul, the deputy chairman of Fatah, as saying that, quote, the decision on who is going to be the prime minister of the new government will be reached in consultations with the factions of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO. Wafa also reported that Allul said in an interview on Palestine TV Sunday night that the goal is to, quote, form a government of the PLO faction with the participation of everyone, end quote. He added that the Central Committee did not discuss any potential candidates for prime minister, but that it only took the decision in principle of forming a political partisan government. Allul also said that forming the next government is not linked to elections. Meanwhile, Hamas has decried the move, saying that it would further solidify the split between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Speaking of elections, social media giant Twitter has reportedly been hard at work, suspending hundreds of accounts linked to foreign fake news manipulations campaigns from their platform. This just as Facebook unveiled its upcoming transparency safeguards, scheduled to be operational by March. So far, in Israel alone, nearly 350 suspicious bot accounts aimed at tainting the social dialogue have been kicked off of Twitter since December. Accounts with tens of thousands of followers. Additionally, reports say that most of the removed accounts were in English, though 3 were in Arabic and 1 was in German. But according to the Times of Israel, a source with knowledge of Twitter's relations with Israel said that the social media giant is working hard to protect the Israeli elections from fake and malicious accounts and posts, just as the platform does worldwide. In fact, the source added that over 10 million accounts are flagged and removed from Twitter weekly, with over 500,000 suspicious logins being addressed every day. Meanwhile, Facebook's Transparency Edition seemed less concerned with removing malicious accounts and more with simply revealing the nature of suspicious accounts and posts. And critics argue that such measures are too little too late anyway, especially as the official release date for these measures hasn't been announced, only that it will be in March ahead of Israeli elections. As for other suggestions on how to preserve fair elections, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, a group of 26 countries in North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, including Israel, has offered to create a foreign observer force. Though Knesset Speaker Edelstein's office already rejected the offer, calling the mere suggestion an unparalleled expression of arrogance. In related news, as Israel gets closer and closer to elections in April, it seems that more and more political parties are popping up by the day. And while the vast array of choices representing all the different interest groups may seem like a good thing, the Israel Democracy Institute would say that it's not. In fact, according to Professor Gideon Rachat, a senior fellow with the Israel Democracy Institute, quote, "We need to create a system of incentives which will solidify the political system into two main blocks." Rachat continued to explain that the current system, quote, "grants small factions disproportionate power, leads to excessive preoccupation with coalition management, does not provide strong incentives for creating an effective opposition, and leads to the allocation of oversized budgets towards sectoral interests." Further, in order to convince Israelis that a return to two major parties would indeed be the healthiest thing for Israel's democracy, the Israel Democracy Institute has begun releasing a number of short explanation videos, which even include Israeli actor and icon Lior Ashkenazi.
ישראל סובלת מבעיית משילות חמורה. מספר המושבים של שתי המפלגות הגדולות הוא אפילו לא חצי ממושבי הכנסת. כך נולדות כאן ממשלות מרובות מפלגות שכל אחת מהן מחזיקה בכוח לא פרופורציונלי וסוחטת את מפלגת השלטון החלשה. יש לנו בחירות כל 2.5 בממוצע. יש לנו שר ביטחון ממפלגה של 6 מנדטים, שר חינוך ממפלגה של 8 מנדטים ושר פנים ממפלגה של 7 מנדטים. וב-20 השנים האחרונות החלפנו 13 שרי פנים, 12 שרי אוצר ו10 שרי חינוך. ככה אי אפשר לנהל מדינה.
Now, you may be asking yourself how we can go about accomplishing this idea. Well, Rachat and the videos claim that it can be done through just a few small changes. Chief among them is to make a law where the head of the largest faction after elections is automatically prime minister and would be in charge of organizing the coalition. Quote, "This will encourage politicians to forge alliances before the elections and will encourage citizens to cast their vote for the largest electoral list." End quote. In a joint letter published by The Guardian on Tuesday, dozens of artists and creatives in the UK called on the BBC broadcaster to boycott the Eurovision 2019 song competition and to try to have it moved from Tel Aviv, saying the BBC is, quote, "bound by its charter to champion freedom of expression for the Palestinians as well." Well, the BBC has since responded to the open call for boycott by rejecting both the letter's claims and its demands. A statement released by the BBC explained that Eurovision is not a political event and does not endorse any political message or campaign. Therefore, since the competition has always supported the values of friendship, inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, the BBC does not believe it would be appropriate to use its participation in the event for political reasons. The statement then added that anyway, quote, "the host country is determined by the rules of the competition, not the BBC," end quote. Still, several international pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel organizations have been answering and spreading the call to boycott.
The Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, or BDS, movement for Palestinian rights has called for a boycott of the Eurovision contest in Tel Aviv because we see it as art washing, whitewashing through arts. Israel's decades-old regime of military occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism.
Additionally, many of the undersigned do represent powerful voices in the cultural world, including Vivienne Westwood, Peter Gabriel, and of course Roger Waters. Israel, however, along with the other nations participating in Eurovision, seem more excited than worried. And Israel's 2018 Eurovision winner, Netta Barzilai, again extended an open hand of peace to any who want to join in.
I believe in a protest. It's okay. I don't believe in boycotting. Eurovision is a European contest. It's not Israel. It's a worldwide thing. We are taking part. I encourage other people to come and take part.
And finally, just in case of disruption, Israeli officials have also explained now that they plan to exercise the right to counter BDS with blocked entries.
Israel is fully aware that anti-Israeli BDS activists will try to disrupt the Eurovision. We have the full authority to make sure that people whose purpose is to harm the state of Israel will not be able to enter our territory. Every country in the world has the same right, and we are going to exercise it with caution. We will open our doors to all as long as those people do not come here as enemies.
All right, that's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next week for the next episode of ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us.